Hello, here we are, every Sunday, live on Autistic Radio. It's a place where autistic people are reaching out to other autistic people and professionals and carers and family members all the way around the world to have the voices of autistic people authentically expressed by them, themselves, us. It's about us. It's about the revolution where autistic people are no longer seen as uncommunicative or impossible to listen to. We're changing that dynamic, and we are here reliably every single week, every Sunday, even if that Sunday is on Christmas Day, to make a live recording that becomes a podcast that expresses some people's autistic identity and that some pieces of identity that other autistic people might be able to relate to. Because finding what we relate to and discovering alternative versions of what autism might mean for us, as opposed to the ones we are presented with by the media, or the ones we are presented with by rather old-fashioned clinical books, or even the most modern thinking that sometimes comes from autistic advocates. Autism is your own thing. If you are autistic, it's what you decide it is, and it's what you experience. There's nobody here that's telling you what to think about your own autism. They're just expressing things that they've come across and what they feel about their own autism. So, if you're on a journey wondering about your own autism, this might be one of the resources you use. It might also be slightly in conflict with some of the rather dogmatic assertions of some people making themselves a reputation as spokespeople for the rest of us. Well, yes, there is a community of autistic people, but there's also a lot of different communities of autistic people. So one group deciding how it should be for everybody else is almost identical to having neurotypical people deciding what's best for ourselves. So here on Autistic Radio, it's about you and your decisions. And we try to facilitate the way that different people want to express their autism, not create some kind of homogeneous group, some cultural identity. Listening to us might mean you end up disagreeing with what some people say, but listening to us might also contain things that mean something to you. I have the group here mostly because we're making a live broadcasting. I just want, as we always do, to give other people the opportunity to say whether what I have just said as a personal statement fits with them and what they want. Anybody want to comment?
I agree with what you said, Jules. I think that's inclusion of a whole other level.
So now we've discussed what we do here at Autistic Radio and the work of the charity Autistic Association, the entirely autistic charity that makes Autistic Radio possible. we're moving to our regular 5:55 p.m. Spectrum Voices, Harry's Facebook page. Harry's not here today. He's enjoying himself off at a music gig. One of his relatives is a performer, and Harry's lucky enough to have tickets. This is Harry's Facebook page, the 555 for Sunday the 13th of July 2025. And the first post Harry shared with us is one of a very striking toy dog, maybe a pug, with a very big eye staring in the face from a photograph, and it says, "Eye contact is not necessary for listening!" Exclamation make, exclamation mark. This post is from Actually Autistic, an educational consultant, late diagnosed, passionate advocate for diagnosed and undiagnosed autistic children and young people. This is a particular bugbear of mine, they say. Even though it is seen as an expectation and a sign of respect or politeness in many Western cultures, not giving eye contact doesn't automatically equate to being shifty or untrustworthy or disrespectful, or even that the person isn't listening. Demanding eye contact is a neurotypical expectation, and Actually Autistic says that to do so is ableist. Because they say that people listen in different ways. People listen in different ways. Some need to look away to reduce the sensory input in order to take in auditory information. Some people find it actually painful, and then others find it just too intense. Some people need to turn their head away from the talker to better engage with them, particularly if they have auditory processing challenges. If the person talking is so put off by the listener not looking at them, then maybe they need to examine their own preconceptions and attempt to open their own minds to the possibility that there may just be more than one way of doing things. My daughter is learning to drive at the moment. She doesn't have to make contact in order to listen to her instructor. Imagine the carnage if she was to do so.
I was thinking about this very subject this week because of the phrase, the eyes are the mirror of the soul. I was wondering where the origins of that came from, because I then started to think about, oh, wait a minute, some people don't like eye contact, especially autistic people. So what's going on there? And then you see this thing about the untrustworthy, shifty aspect, which is because if you don't maintain eye contact, what have you got to hide? And it's like, it gets deeper and deeper. It's like, are they trying to read your soul? So there's this thing of the eyes are used to read people. And so-called neurotypicals who depend on eye contact, or anybody who depends on eye contact, I think has been maybe raised or conditioned to expect that that's how they will read a situation, by looking at someone, by looking maybe right in their eyes, but at their face perhaps. So it does get incredibly uncomfortable for some people, and people do communicate in different ways. And so perhaps people who don't like eye contact, well, they have their good reasons why they don't like it, but another thing is they just don't read the world that way. And again, that's maybe history. It's like a visual perspective, which goes way back. You can get in the history of art, and before that, the changes in, the way perspective was portrayed and measured. So there are reasons, I think, why there's this dependency on the eye as the means of reading the world.
I just don't know, what are you supposed to do. I just feel like I'm staring at the sort of bridge of the nose between people's eyes, and I know they're there, and I just want to look around and get a sense of the space I'm in, which is more important because I know they're sat there and they're going to be talking to me. I don't need to look at them.
It's so nice when you're around somebody who's got coming from a similar place with eye contact, to have a conversation with somebody and it's just comfortable. I remember feeling just like almost this really uncomfortable fixed way. It's like, okay, try and look at them, try not to fidget, stay still. And when I'm around people that I can just be myself around, it's just so much easier to have a proper conversation.
I think this goes back to that word that obsesses me, of expectation. It's the expectation that this is how we understand things. It's like, when you say fidgety there, I'll do this thing of like want to move around and pick things up and show them to people. But in most situations, you're expected not to be like that or behave like that. You're meant to be sat still in contact with someone else in a pre-arranged, pre-scripted arrangement. So it's that expectation of how to behave.
If you have to have eye contact to be thought of as listening, what does that say about phone calls?
Well, I think, Robbie, one of the things is that both autistic people and the new generations of non-autistic people say that they don't use phone calls very much. They prefer to use the new method of communication that is a video phone. A Facebook call with video or a WhatsApp call with video. Using old-fashioned telephones just as audio is one of the things that the new generation say that they don't want in the modern workplace.
I had somebody lecture me a wee bit recently. They'd taken the way that I make or don't make eye contact, and they took it upon themselves to be like, it's not like you're just as good as me. You can make eye contact with me. Like it was like they thought that I was too anxious to look them in the eye. And I was like, oh no, it's really not that at all. And I just shared a bit that I was comfortable sharing. But I remember that from my younger years as well, as like realizing that if I didn't do this thing like that, conform socially, then people would think that I was weak or fearful, when I really wasn't. I just didn't want them to look in my eyes.
I think I've found a happy medium, but it's taken until the age of 60 to do so. I don't feel pressurised to give people eye contact. I will have a conversation with anybody, and to concentrate on my own words and thoughts, I will look past them or look down or look away or look at something else. And if they perceive that as difficult or rude or whatever, they're going to have to accept it or deal with it for themselves. That's not going to work for most people in most situations. You have to have some kind of conformity and some kind of masking. You're not mostly in those situations where you can just do it your own way. So that's not very helpful for people of younger age groups. What I do know about it is that looking at people in their eyes when they're talking to me doesn't give me much more information normally than listening to their words or the sound of their words. I will pick up, if I want to intensely look at them, lots of micro informations, and it will give me a sense of their micro expressions and such like, and that can be useful. But if I try to do that constantly rather than as an intense examination, I won't be able to do all the other things at the same time, thinking really clearly and listening actively to them. I can listen much more actively to somebody if they're not expecting me to do some kind of performance for them. What concerns me is that in a lot of neurotypical situations, the communication is all about conformity, and the words are irrelevant and the concepts are irrelevant, and what is actually happening and being communicated is a group sameness, an inclusion. So what I perceive as a conversation is not really a conversation.
Yeah, good point. It's like a conditioned environment. You know, when you're not looking at someone and communicating, you're almost in this open space. I realise it sometimes when I'm on the phone to someone, it's like I'm in my head, but it's like they're in my head too. And everything's, you know, it's not just about me, I'm in the environment too. So we're all in this open space. That sounds a bit far out, but it's a lot more different to the conditioned space you're talking about that is created by, you know, demanded eye contact.
Rolling on from what you're saying there, Raymond, and I'm really in with that concept about this open space, because if I'm not giving eye contact and I'm having a serious conversation with them and I'm concentrating on the words and concepts and making them almost irrelevant, then that's incredibly uncomfortable for the other person. If their expectation is to do the other thing, which is to find a kind of comfortability in sameness. What I'm doing there, that they haven't given permission for, is forcing them to only have the words and concepts to deal with. And a lot of the time, I'm purposeful in that. If I'm talking to an employee where I'm trying to explain something to them, I don't feel the necessary need to dominate them by looking at them and making expressions at them and changing their emotions. I'm passing on information to them, and they can find that incredibly uncomfortable because there's no other distraction. That's all they've got, the words.
Yeah, it's like if you explain something in a practical work environment with someone, you're not really going to have too much eye contact. You're going to be both observing a situation, working with it, talking over the situation, like a running commentary almost, or dropping in little grunts and hints and movements, gestures, you know. Occasionally some folk want eye contact in that situation, even just for some kind of reassurance, you know, like a shared reality, a shared joke, a shared knowing of something, but it's very brief, I find. There's other ways to gain that, but I do get concerned sometimes that digital technology has almost simulated this environmental consciousness in what some refer to as a cloud consciousness, which is like all information's in a digital ether, and we access it as, you know, users.
We've got someone commenting in with like high fives and okays and flame emojis. So I think they're agreeing with what we've been saying.
I think the use of the word ableist in the post is quite interesting, because some people don't come across that word ableist. And the way I've tried to answer that for myself is ableism is a prejudice against people who are disabled. A simple definition. If what the poster is saying is that it's an ableist assumption to request eye contact, and it's an ableist assumption that disables us in a social situation if that's what is forced upon us. And as I'm talking, I notice that I'm staring at the ceiling, and if I was speaking to somebody direct, I would still be staring at the ceiling. They would be looking at me, but I would be staring at the ceiling.
You are communing.
I can keep up with most of you. Keep up with blah 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 blah. I can keep up with you most of the time, Raymond. But communing, can you help me with that one?
I see that word as like, just gaining access to the general environment, nothing to do with communion, like the religious thing. But it derives from that too. It's kind of like a merging with things. You could sort of say channeling, but that's a bit loaded. When I see really nice plants and really get into it and just sit there and exist with them and be there with them, that's communing. Do you see what I mean?
I think it's interesting to discuss this here because we are an audio-only environment. As we're making this recording, we're not looking at each other. None of us have turned their cameras on. In fact, we ask people not to, because we want to concentrate on just the things that we're saying and thinking about. When we do that as an autistic audio model, I believe that gives us more latitude to be ourselves, more opportunity for the equity in the communication. And what I notice is that when we invite professionals, they try to subvert it right at the beginning, because what they want to do is often to engage in an online cameras on discussion right at the beginning, before making any kind of commitment to come in speaking with us or working with us and recording with us. So for me, that assumption that it's absolutely necessary to have a Zoom call or a Teams call before making a commitment to a recording, it just shows how wedded the non-autistic world is to thinking that they can tell what somebody is feeling or thinking, or the veracity of what they're saying, by looking at them, by staring into their eyes and getting eye contact. They think they can make a judgment as to whether somebody is being truthful or genuine or is able. And these things are, in my mind, false. All the proofs are that it's almost impossible, bar 50-50, to tell whether somebody is telling you the truth or not. So it's cultural rather than necessary. And they're constantly trying to, from their own point of view, impose a culture upon us, even if they have decided that they are in a profession which recognises that we have a different way of communicating.
Yeah, it makes you wonder which one's non-human or inhuman, because sometimes they say like lack of eye contact is a bit non-human, but to impose what you just described there upon another person as a way of behaving is all too human, I suppose, but it's not being very, honest. Well, not honest. even natural is not a good enough word, but the humanity, where's the humanity in that, in imposing a rigid set of conditions?
I'll finish that by saying, where's the empathy if that's what they impose upon us? The next post. It's a picture outside a schoolyard with a child upset and somebody who is official trying to console the mum. It's from Freedom Therapy, East Sussex, and the autism support community. A page, a blogger, later diagnosed autistic, ADHD, 2 sons, writer, blogger, public talks, autism, mental health and bullying. Freedom Therapy's wellbeing practitioner, psychotherapist. Here are some neurodivergent informed reasons your child might be experiencing separation anxiety at school drop-off, especially if they're autistic, ADHD or AUDHD, autistic and ADHD. The first one they call transition stress. Neurodivergent children often struggle with transitions, even small ones. The shift from home, a predictable, safe environment, to school, noisy, demanding, uncertain, can trigger anxiety. Does that ring true to people?
I ran away my first day at school, and I was collected by the teacher about a mile away, and then I was just sort of resigned to it.
Yeah, I cried when I went to primary school. When I went to secondary school at the age of 12, I was so dehydrated and ill, I had to go to the nurse. Started vomiting.
And sometimes when it's not anxiety, it can just be dread. I think young people can really feel just that overwhelming dread of what they've got to achieve, even if it's not at the point of like anxiety.
Sensory overload. School settings can be loud, bright, crowded and chaotic, overwhelming sensory systems from the moment the child arrives. Staying with a trusted adult may feel like the only grounding anchor. Is that familiar?
I mean, they are objectively really noisy places. Anytime I've had to go to school during school time for a meeting or to collect my son, the playground is full of screaming, and then you go into the classrooms and there seems to be this new open plan thing that I'm like, why do they do that? It just makes everything really, really noisy because you can hear everything. How are kids meant to concentrate on that? And then the lovely fluorescent lights.
Yeah, Nicola, you're saying that as an adult mum, and I completely agree with you. I've come across these environments and they are absolutely awful. I couldn't teach, not because of the other problems, but because I couldn't deal with that constant noise and that environment of the fluorescent lights. The sensory overload in modern buildings, I think, is possibly worse than some of the dilapidated buildings we had in the past.
I noticed in that recent drama that was on TV that we discussed about, teenage boys being conditioned online, that in the school scenes, yeah, it was that chaos that I remember from school, the external environment, the playground, even the hallways. But in my school, the hallways were extremely disciplined. If you misbehaved, you were just taken in for corporal punishment immediately. But the classrooms, I noticed in this kind of portrayal in that drama on TV, was that everyone was kind of online. They were using tech, they were using digital things. There was like videos in all the classes so the teachers could just switch off slightly. That may have been, artistic license or fiction, but maybe that is the case. I remember doing an adult learning class a couple of years back and being a bit freaked out that the blackboard was actually a huge screen that we were to view something on. And I thought, oh, this is new. So, yeah, just that thing of that calming, to calm the kids down, they plug them into the matrix.
The other thing, as an aside to all this, is 9 years of bullying as well.
Yeah, I think one of the main issues that neurodivergent people describe as adults is long periods of intense bullying by their peers at school. So if we're looking at all these really good reasons why a neurodivergent person might feel reluctant to get involved with this, one of the first things we need to really think about as parents is whether or not the child is experiencing bullying from outside experiences. We can look through this list and we can deny it for ourselves and try and avoid it, and in some ways make the child the centre of the problem. But if we're ignoring that there's another reason to do with bullying that is masked under all of this, we're doing the child a disservice. But let's just assume that we're not dealing with bullying at the moment. Social anxiety or masking fatigue. The pressure to mask or fit in can be emotionally draining. Saying goodbye means stepping into a space where the child feels that they can't be themselves anymore. And that space might have lack of predictability. If the routines in the new environment aren't clearly explained, or if the classroom environment changes often, this unpredictability can increase fear and resistance, even if they like learning that happens. And then all of these things can culminate in emotional regulation difficulties. So separation can bring big feelings, and neurodiverse kids often need co-regulation. Without support in those intense moments, their system might go into panic mode.
There seems to be this big break from being, a parental-child relationship to a child-institution relationship being described here. In a perfect world, that is. So when we bring in things like, undercurrents like bullying, and I would attach it, I suppose, in this situation to the vulnerability felt by a child at that vulnerable age, being removed from a very comfortable home to some external reality. There may have been preparation for it. I'm trying to recall whether I had preparation. I felt I was plunged right in. I can't actually remember going to anywhere else like it. Maybe to my grandmother's to hang out with my cousins and stuff off a weekend perhaps, but no big social community thing. Even though I knew some of the kids that were going at the same time as me from the nearby area. And I suppose as kids we spoke about it all like we were going there, but at 5, you know, I don't know what we were really communicating to each other. But later on in your teens it gets a bit, more difficult. That's quite something in the text there from Robbie. He went from a 2-classroom school to a large school. Yeah, the only time I was ever in a 2-classroom or 2-person classroom, a 2-classroom school. Yeah, I was in a 2-person class once in 5th year because at my school everybody left after 4th year.
The post continues. Attachment needs aren't being met. If a child feels misunderstood or unsupported during the day, they may cling harder to their safe person. We shouldn't see this as manipulation. It's a physical nervous system response to unmet emotional safety. If we have a lack of understanding, that can lead us to misinterpret what's happening, and the misinterpretation breeds impatience within us as carers or parents or other pupils. What we're assuming is that this is defiance instead of distress. We can see clinginess instead of a nervous system seeking the safety that it deserves. We can expect a smooth drop-off because it's just school. And that shows that we might be forgetting how much sensory, emotional and social load that really holds. And if you're not autistic, you might not realise those things in the intensity that an autistic person that you're caring for does. The post goes on to give solutions. It says, understanding changes everything. It slows us down, which I'm going to put in as an aside to say that as a parent, the first skill I knew to learn was to slow down in all situations. It helps us meet the need behind behaviour, not just react to the noise on the surface. The lack of understanding often leads to misinterpretation. This is why so many neurodivergent families breathe easier during the holidays, because there's no school drop-offs, there's no daily meltdowns, there's no peeling a child off yourself. There's calm mornings, less masking, more safety for them and for parents. Because the break isn't just from school, it's from the emotional toll of the whole of the child's life that nobody sees.
Is it me or am I feeling a bit of trauma from the parents here, you know? And also some of the language earlier was a wee bit odd, I thought. Assuming defiance, manipulation. Maybe that's just me.
No, I think the poster is trying to address some of the things that happen. And one of the things that happens with autistic kids is they are labelled as defiant, as a bad thing, when it's not being interpreted as though the child knows what's best for themselves and is reaching out to communicate something. It's seen as defiance and something that needs to be overcome, and that happens. And it appears to come alongside ABA in lots of situations, this idea that people should have a certain way of behaviour as human beings. Lots of slurs against autistic kids creep in, and even when we're trying our best as parents, we can kind of reach those internalized ableisms that come from just being in a society that wants kids to behave, get on, and just make my life easy so I can go to work, you know. So I don't think we can blame parents from resorting to things that they've heard from their childhood or from what happens in social media. The poster's trying to say, if we understand this more, we can have some tolerance, and we don't go into these ableist tropes.
Yeah, I like that phrase you used, ableisms built into society.
Picking up on what's written in the private chat, the poster writes, I went from a two-classroom school to a large school, as Raymond read out earlier. I was then separated from all the children that I knew, and that kind of expresses how it is, that huge jump that somebody might be experiencing, and that huge jump needs a lot of understanding to get into the mind of the child, especially if they're not the same neurotype as yourself. Empathizing with that child is the key here.
I think in my primary school, another primary school was closed down, and so we suddenly got this whole shared intake come in one of the years, which was disrupting for those who arrived, but disrupting for us who received them as well, because they came from a pretty heavy part of town.
The next post is from Black and Autistic. How does internal stimming show up for you? And the post is a meme. The first frame says, you might be internally stimming if, and it says, what is internal stimming? You've probably heard of external stims like rocking, hand flapping or fidgeting, but internal stimming? That's the stuff happening in our heads or inside our bodies that no one else can see. It's the hidden ways we self-soothe and regulate or cope, often without even realising that we're doing it. Examples: repeating words or phrases in your head, looping song lyrics, math equations, etc., mentally rehearsing conversations or scenarios, visualising comforting images or memories, silent counting or tapping inside your mouth, tensing specific muscles without moving. Why does internal stimming happen? Just like external stims, internal ones help manage with sensory overload, emotional intensity, boredom or overwhelm, transitions or stress. For many of us who are high masking, internal stimming became our go-to because it was safer, quieter, less likely to be judged, less likely to be noticed. So basically hidden. Are people aware of this?
Oh yeah, I'm really glad somebody's talking about this, because I've brought it up with a bunch of different people. This idea that you can get a buzz from your own thought, at times. So, but there was also this thing of like repeating songs, earworms, like whenever a certain event would turn up, a song would appear in my head, a line from a song which seemed to fit the moment. And it is a kind of reinforcing thing, it's a comforting thing. And of course, getting a buzz or a high from your creative thought is, of course, comforting, especially when you feel like you're not really connecting with other, mainstream things. So you can develop private worlds and heightened imagination from a very young age, and go off into your obsessive little explorations, for good or bad, So, yeah, I think this is quite a subject.
I think I do recognise some of this in myself, but I'm not sure if it's for the self-regulation reasons that I might rock or flap my hands or some of these other things. It's sometimes in conversations with people I need to have something going on inside my head because they're talking so slowly, or they're introducing lots of things that are not new to me, or all of the facts are the same, and I have to do something inside my head to kind of give them space and not just try and move the thing on. It's a kind of marking time thing. Is that stimming, or is that internal stimming, or is that something different?
I would say so. I kind of refer to that as defamiliarizing. It's like if I'm hearing something I've heard before, or someone's conversation, it's taken a while to reach its conclusion, let's say, or develop, I will pay attention but look at other aspects of what's going on. So it's like opening up and defamiliarizing the attention you give the person while still being attentive. It's a bizarre thing.
I think it's stimming when I'm just repeating the same words over in my head and saying, give them chance, give them chance, give them chance, give them chance, wait, and that's going on in my head. I think that might be stimming, because that's trying to take control of myself so that I don't break in and just say, for fuck's sake, let's finish this. So I suppose that is stimming, but the kind of thing you're thinking is kind of, what can I do with this? Yes, I know all this information. Where can I go with it to say something different next time that takes us off in a separate situation? I don't suppose that is stimming. That's creative thought, isn't it?
But there is this element of wanting to avoid being silent, of just letting go and just letting things happen. So you become involved through a process, whether it's physical or mental. But I like this one, tensing specific muscles without moving.
Oh, I used to do my Kegel exercises when I was talking to people sometimes.
Is that bladder control?
Yeah, it's everything down there. It's bladder control, and also ejaculation and control, and erection preservation as well, for those of us with those kind of genitalia.
Oh, Taoist magic, right.
When I'm walking around, I could create a playlist. Songs just jump into my head, and there's one thing that when I go to fill the car up with petrol, I usually go to the same pump. And thanks to the Beatles' White Album, as I'm walking to the shop side there to pay for it, I've got a really posh English voice in my head going, number 9, number 9. So I know which pump I've used.
Oh, so it wasn't lovely Rita meter maid, right? But do you always try to get the same amount of cash payment as you fill up your car?
Yeah, I draw the same amount of money every week, and I try and make that money last. And it goes up by £5 a year, but I put a certain amount of petrol in on Wednesday cash, and then if I've had to go out a bit further, I will top it up, but I will only ever top up by £5 a time.
Now, I used to try and control the nozzle so as it would always hit a certain number on the dial. So it was like 23 quid or something like that.
Yeah, always the same amount. I always put the same amount in, even if, like I say, if I've had to make a couple of extra journeys that week and it means I have to fill the car up again, then that's £5 still. Although it won't come out the cash in my pocket, it will come off on my card.
Moving to the next post, and it's been shared from Swan Autism in Scotland, which is an APO, an autistic people's organisation, which has lots of different activities that people around the country and around the world could learn from, I'm sure. It says, make sure to book tickets for our workshop next week, Wednesday the 16th of July, on Growing Up Autistic. This session will cover our different experiences of puberty and growing up, and is an essential workshop for anyone who wishes to learn more about autistic people, whether as an ally, families, carers, friends, colleagues and supporters, or as a professional. And I'm clicking on the link, and it says, it looks to be free. I'm just checking. So when this goes out, this is obviously going to be after we finish this edit, but it's an example for the future. So there's an expectation to pay for this for somebody who's unemployed or on low income of £10 or something like $20. Somebody self-funding in employment is suggested they pay £20, and other organisations there's increasing amounts. So no, it's not free, but it is something that some people might be willing to pay for. So if you find Swan, SWAN, on Eventbrite, you will be able to follow them and maybe follow some of their other helpful events in the future. What do people think?
I think it sounds quite interesting. I would like to see if there was more in the description about it. But yeah, generally sounds like quite a important thing to be sensitive about as well. So I think it's like there's a lot of there is more there's more to read, so that would be quite helpful to know about.
Okay, I'll do some reading then. Swan workshops are for anyone who wishes to learn more about autistic people. They are focused on everyday experiences rather than professional contexts. We offer training sessions for professional development if this is what you're looking for. Here it's about body changes, hormones, sensory profiles, and how going through puberty is a real difficult time for autistic girls. How do we make sense of who we are when we often feel so different to everyone around us? The constant striving to meet neuronormative standards often leaves us feeling wrong or broken or like an alien. Learning how to read and respond to our bodies, sensory needs, manage fluctuations in hormones, and having access to appropriate autistic sexual health and well-being education is so important, but often something we are not supported to understand and develop. This session will cover our different experiences of puberty and growing up, both how we experience and express our emotions, sensory world and relationships, but also the role that the environments and people around us play in shaping a positive autistic identity. With titles of sections: Who Am I? Identity and Understanding Our Neurology, Masking Trauma and Feeling Safe, My Sensory World During Puberty, Interoception and Self-Care, Making Sense of Emotions, Alexarrhythmia, Energy Levels and Burnout, How Do You See Me? Communication, Validation and Double Empathy, Building Safety, Connection and Agency. SWAN is a women's organisation and non-binary organisation in the main, so it's specifically aimed at those particular parts of our population, 50% of us.
It does sound like a good workshop, and I was thinking there as I was listening that it would be good to learn as a mother, but also looking back, I think it can be quite healing sometimes to hear things like that and kind of be able to kind of hear how it could have been or should have been, just because I think for those of us who've grown up in the past, things like these sort of subjects, these sort of topics that were covered were just really painful, difficult parts of transitions in life that there really wasn't a lot of support around. And I think a lot of us, men and women, can identify that when we talk about school and how things might have changed compared to when we were there. And, oh, that's great that autistic people are being recognised. And yeah, so in this situation, I feel like it's almost that it can be a little bit kind of compassionate towards your past self, to have a look at these sorts of things. Fill in the gaps.
Well put, Nicola, yeah, because reflecting back, sex education at school was often part of biology or maybe even social education, but it seemed to be handled in a certain way. It was no real preparation for the implications of a lot of it, just the facts, So, but again, 50% of the community, yeah. But autistic sexual health as a subject, which they phrase that as here, is really important and largely unspoken of to a certain degree. We had a certain involvement here, didn't we, Jules, with a couple who were running something from, I think, the States, yeah, and brought up.
Yeah, we did. A couple of sex therapists came and we made a podcast with them. Whenever it comes up, people say, yes, that's great, that should be talked about. Unfortunately, they tend to shy away when they're given an opportunity and a recording date. So if we could reach out to anyone at the moment listening who has an interest in this field, some kind of background as an autistic person or as a professional, then we would be very interested to show your work here at Autistic Radio.
I think it's particularly important to have conversations about consent and about boundaries, and how do you know what your boundaries are and how do you communicate them once you might have figured them out. And boundaries are so tricky to learn about, and it took me ages to figure out that, you know, a lot of this has got to do with being able to kind of be in touch with yourself, your feelings, your body, and being able to know when you're feeling happy and safe and recognize when you're not. And for a lot of autistic people who might have been or might still be living in states of like chronic dysregulation, that's really, really hard to learn. So I think it's those kind of topics like feel important to look at.
A worrying thing is that sometimes the conditioning is already present for people's ideas of their sexual health from a very young age, you know.
Any final thoughts on that? I see somebody says it's a vulnerable subject for many and it feels very exposing. Anybody else before I move on?
Yeah, I think I just want to say, and it is quite pretty grave, but it is such an important issue. You know, 9 out of 10 autistic women have experienced sexual assault, and there's areas, huge regions, police regions of the United Kingdom, where no perpetrators have been brought to justice when the victim has been autistic. There's a real failure in our justice system and policing there has been, and I know that there's a lot of work going on to address it, but there's been a horrific misunderstanding of autistic people that's led to really, really tragic outcomes. Huge issue for our community.
Thank you for bringing that up, Nicola. I don't know the exact figure, but I read a figure that said that autistic people are much more likely to have experienced sexual abuse either by a family member or by a stranger than the non-autistic community. I also read figures that described exactly as you say, Nicola, that because of somebody's autism diagnosis, authorities are reluctant to follow the whole of the justice system when the victim is known to be neurodivergent or autistic, because they are not seen as reliable witnesses in court. Okay, so the next post here might be a bit contentious. It's from Aurora Consulting, a well-known person here in Scotland, and their post is actually an essay. So I'm going to pick out parts of it. It starts with, some newspapers seem obsessed with the cost of special educational needs and how we are heading to the dogs because of it. It's not a new theme. There are often regular articles about the cost of raising autistic children, the cost of schools, and I find having our lives reduced to pound signs disturbing, because our lives as autistic people have intrinsic value. It's immutable. We have the right to exist and have our needs met. I'll pause there because I've just read the phrase that we have the right to have our needs met. So the question I want to put out to people is, do we have the right to have our needs met?
I think there's something about opportunity, and I think it's something that in a fair society we should have equal opportunity, and or we should. But that's as I think that's like as a. I think that's got a common good, but I don't think that we can, demand another person meets our needs. We can't. But there's something about there's something more nuanced about it, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the reason I stopped there was because it starts to go into what our rights are. And rights are things that are not actually born into us, and inalienable rights, like some rights might be. Rights can also be the rights that have been given by the rest of society to a group. They're defined by the laws of a society rather than maybe by philosophy. Maybe there's an inalienable right to have the opportunity of health and food and activity and shelter and freedom from persecution, freedom from imprisonment and slavery. And these are rights that we have come to accept philosophically as equal members of society. But there's another group of rights that is given by a society by its laws, and if we're dealing with those rights, then they're a negotiation with the rest of society. So as we read the rest of this, there might be the possibility that we're talking about different kinds of rights when we're reading it. The post says, society has to accept accountability for its actions and the costs involved. The Aurora Consulting had a conversation with a dear one just the other day about the fact that a child has likely developed CPTSD, some kind of post-traumatic stress disorder, due to bullying at school. So maybe that's childhood PTSD, which was not handled appropriately, and their treatment by staff members who saw the child as a burden. The child is not a burden at all, they are a delight. Their needs weren't difficult to meet, but not meeting them has caused significant harm. So Aurora Consulting discussed their difficulties, including CAMS, for an assessment for CPTSD or support. It took 3 referrals before they're accepted over the course of 6 months. And it describes a difficulty getting this child's support. But now the child is in a better school and in a class where they're not being bullied, and it's a good step forward. But they still need support to process their past trauma in order to move on. It says that if we give autistic and otherwise ND kids the support they need from the beginning, it costs so much less than in the long run. Saying we can't afford this is a false economy. Why have multiple meetings and bring in outside agencies with a family over which just cut that out, Harry. No, not going to read that. So, What can we do differently? According to Aurora Consulting, what can we do differently? Many things, but for starters, believe autistic children and their carers. We do not want to be in multiple meetings and have phone calls all the time either. We want our children to thrive and be safe. We want them to have their rights respected and met. We want schools to meet their professional obligations and standards without us having to remind them of what they are. Schools and other professionals need additional training from neurodiverse professionals like Aurora Consulting to better understand autistic and otherwise ND lived experience, to develop empathy and understanding for the children in their care. Aurora Consulting says that they've yet to go into a school which had the Equality Act or the UN Convention on the Rights of Disabled People displayed on their walls. The UN Convention on the Rights of the Child is in every school, but disabled children need the opportunity to learn about their rights as disabled people, so let's get some of them up on the walls too. We need newspapers to stop demonising the existence of those who have different needs and start looking to solutions.
I think a lot of this is in the context of schools being really underfunded per pupil. And I know that in our school, like, so many of the teachers are ending up using their own money for school supplies, so that kids can have like the basic, what we would think of as the basics. I think it's been really difficult for schools, particularly since all the lockdowns. And I know that there's like a lot of work going on, but see, when I've interacted with teachers from lockdown onwards, they've really, really gone through it. I felt I'm quite sensitive to these things, and a lot of I feel like I'm speaking to quite shell-shocked people. They're dealing with a lot of really upsetting and complicated issues all the time. So that's where I think that context is really important. And I think that there's so many families who are really, really struggling, that the number of families in crisis is huge. It's it is quite an overwhelming situation.
I really value your input here, Nicola, because you are a mother of 2 autistic children right now dealing with the situation. Autistic Consulting isn't. Autistic Consulting is making a professional career. A lot of what they say is absolutely correct, and they've got support here. Robbie says people forget about the cost of needs not being met, and that's true. But then Raymond points out, what are autistic needs? And the situation out there in the UK is a mess, an absolute mess. It's collapsing. The way it has been structured and organised up until this point is not tenable. It's not possible to continue like it is. And using combative terms and fighting the local authority is part of the problem. Asking us to go back to a period of time when various compensations and rights were given in a situation where the general public is no longer willing to allocate responses to that because of other things that the general public would prefer to spend its money on. I don't think it's as valuable. I think we need to work out a different way of doing all the cheap and simple things and decomplicate the situation. But the reality is that the politics of our country affects our situation, and we have to adapt to that. We can't just keep banging on about how our rights are not being met. We have to give much more positive solutions and ways of doing it.
Is this like the social contract where we all expect to be looked after as a social unit? And if the economy is struggling, then cuts have to be made and somebody within this social contract will suffer. But the expectation is that everybody expects to be looked after to a certain extent. Or else we would all be going private if we could afford that, and maybe doing... I was going to ask about homeschooling. You know, would that relieve pressure at all? But then when I thought about that, it kind of led in my head to this idea of if you did it in a group sense of people with similar needs, you know, you end up becoming what used to be termed a special school, you know. But homeschooling itself may be an economically viable option, but is it acceptable in the social contract for you to opt out?
I wouldn't be able to opt out of it. I think that they're definitely, like there's without a certain level of means, I don't think it's a very safe and easy option. And there is a lot of there's a lot of good stuff happening, and I feel like, you know, we've managed by having a slightly reduced timetable. That's made a big difference, and it's kind of getting priorities set appropriately for ourselves, I'd say. I'll leave it there just now.
I want to bring in what Robbie says in the text. And he points out that there is plenty of money for war, and our country has allocated a huge amount of money because its priority is what it perceives of as the insecurity and danger in our current world. And that's a choice. The choice has been that money that could be spent, there's no actual, as he says, there's no limit to the money. There's choices being made, and we are deciding to tax our country a certain amount and then spend it on certain things, and we could make different decisions. He points out that homeschooling doesn't teach compliance. So for some people, that's an advantage. The thing is that the structures that are in place at the moment and people have become used to are clearly unaffordable in the minds of both the politicians and the electorate, the people making the decisions. So we have to find a way around that. Simply fighting them and saying, now there are 4 times as many people who need SEND provision, so give us 4 times the amount of money, I feel is inappropriate, because the SEND provision that was provided in the first place seemed to be an awful gravy train for some practitioners, and for other practitioners an appalling way of trying to do their best in terrible circumstances, underfunded. So some professionals having a terrible time and some professionals taking the mickey. So the whole system needs looking at, and what this post appears to be saying is that there's an alternative to being radical rather than calling for radical. But maybe I've misinterpreted it.
I do like the point about having the rights of disabled people on the walls. They do have stuff about children's rights in the schools, and I think the disability rights, it's going to make things better for everyone, because like I think we've said before, at some point in life everybody's going to become disabled in some way or another, and it is that kind of, you know, we are the people, like we organize to like run ourselves. We're not, I don't think that we're run by like alien overlords. I think it's humans. And surely, like, I think like there's somebody in the chat said people forget about the cost of needs not being met, which was again in this post too. But it's better for everyone if we live in a compassionate society. Like none of, like all of us are going to feel vulnerable one time. You don't want that to just be like, oh yeah, now society's got the boot on my neck. You want to feel like, you know, like, thank goodness I'm safe. I'm really grateful for that, surely.
Yeah, Nicola. And following on from that, there's support in the post here for what you're saying here. It says, we need newspapers to stop demonising the existence of those who have different needs and start looking to solutions within our community. Headlines making our children out to be burdens makes the stigma we face worse rather than better. It adds to the shame society already places on us. Sensitive reporting is necessary to ensure public perceptions are accurate. I think we can all agree with that, can't we?
Yeah, there's some really interesting reading on the effects of stigma on our mental health. So it is so worth pushing back on that as much as we can.
To conclude, one of the definite undercurrents from this essay by Aurora Consulting is that autistic people and autistic professionals will have solutions that save money by early intervention. They will have solutions that save money by appropriateness at the right time, and they will have solutions that use the money far more effectively than the current status quo. I think that's the undercurrent to what Aurora Consulting is saying, that autistic people and autistic professionals will do the job better if they are given the opportunity.
I've spent quite a lot of the week looking at good job options for autistic people who don't want to speak to people, and I'm been coming up with some ideas. And one of the things that I came across was like an interview with someone, an autistic man who worked as a data scientist for Microsoft, and he was sharing that like Microsoft are one of the employers that have figured out that if we exclude autistic people from the workforce, we're not creating like societies that are inclusive of autistic people. And I think companies are going, well, this is a demographic we want to be able to like sell things to, sell products to, engage with. So like they're recognizing that without us on their workforce, they don't understand that whole part of their market, and recognizing the skills that autistic people have in terms of like attention to detail and tolerance for repetitive work and lone working and preference not to speak to people. We kind of do quite well in jobs where we can get our heads down. So I'm feeling a lot more optimistic about the direction things are going in than I would have a few weeks ago. Just seeing a lot of development, and I think a lot of like response to the work that autistic people have been doing by sharing their stories, like you have all been doing for a long time by the sounds of things.
So there is an autistic dollar.
Yeah, there's an autistic dollar. The people in control of the autistic dollar are often the neurodivergent parents of autistic people, and the people in control of that autistic dollar are often the neurotypical parents of autistic people, buying services, buying treatments, buying cures, buying training, buying services for their autistic offspring. That's one of the autistic dollars. And then the other one is the government and charity money that is spent by generally neurotypical people on services that are then provided by neurotypical people. And I think that the hopeful change is that more and more autistic people themselves are taking the responsibility and creating their own professions and working within the professions. And it's going to take time, but it feels as though it's happening. I agree with Nicola. Just a quick one, Harry, to see if we can fit it into the edit. And I'm going to go to the second one down after that, Raymond. Autism parents do this. Autism parents do this. They homeschool. They trim fingernails, they remove tags, they cut hair, they buy fidget and iPads, they do research, they worry 24/7, they attend to hygiene, they research, they advocate, they love unconditionally, and they cook 2 meals, and they do more. So, this is a post from Teresa Bulls to Autism Space. Autism parents do all of these things. Their autistic children have IEPs or EHCPs, or they may be homeschooled. They act as occupational therapists, they act as physical therapist or speech therapist and language practitioner for their autistic children. They remove the tags from their clothes, as some autistic children don't like them. They cut their hair, they trim their fingernails, they attend to personal hygiene, and they cook 2 different meals each day, especially if the children has sensory issues towards food. They buy fidget toys and iPads. My house is full of them. They do research on autism and attend courses. They worry 24/7 about their autistic children, but they love them unconditionally and are the best advocates. This is life in many autism families.
Do we know anything about Autism Space?
Well, Autism Space is where this post has been sent towards. Autism Space itself is a very big public group with 50,000 members in, with mostly neurotypical posters, parents and occupational therapists and such like. But it's a mixed area with interesting stuff. And this person, Teresa Bulls, is actually a moderator of Autism Space.
So given the multitasking that was expressed here when I was mentioning earlier the autistic pound, from the point of view of a consumer purchasing power, reflecting what Nicola said about Microsoft seeing the market out there, this makes me think about an idea I had about the autistic CV, about how autistic people express themselves in the market as potential employees or job descriptions. You know, when you think about the multitasking described here, you can see that there's a lot to say in this autistic CV. But none of that covers love.
None of that covers love. Love is the thing that is the most important thing over all of those different skills and challenges that you have when you're dealing with any child. And you might feel that dealing with an autistic child, if you're neurotypical, might be more of a challenge than you would otherwise expect. But we know that you love your children, and we know that you want the best for them. Spaces where autistic people speak to each other can also be spaces which give you the tools, and some of those autistic spaces are without judgment. Thank you to everybody who has provided their words out there on Facebook for Harry to share. Thank you for the work that you do in doing that, and thank you for Harry for collating a part of the internet that is safe for me to look at and for us to discuss here at Autistic Radio. Harry will be back next week for the live at 5:55, and we will be back every week, Sunday 5:55, for the Harry's Facebook page.